Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Hey everybody, Dan Kent here. Because we did a panel this week, it's just going to be me. I'm still going to do a summary of the panel discussion, and I'll probably discuss a couple things that people emailed in. But now that I'm doing this, it's kind of weird without Shawna here. She usually has like a great question to kind of kick off the episode, and I think I'm going to have to skip that, and I think I'll just get right into the summary. Shoot, I should have thought of something fun to talk about, but you know, when it's only me, then it's just kind of like having a fun conversation with myself, which I do, but I don't want that recorded. So, so I'm going to just jump right into the summary. We've been looking at Matthew 5 verses like 43 to 47, and this pericope, this little chunk of text, really focuses on enemy love, and this is a very difficult kind of command that Jesus gives us, an expectation that Jesus has for his disciples. And so we've been processing it quite a bit over the last few weeks, and so there's so many different loose ends that we thought, well, a panel discussion would be good so that maybe we can hit a whole bunch of different things, and that's what we did. And this weekend we had Greg, but then we also had Osheta and Ted Lewis, and Cedric Baker was there, and we covered just a ton of things, and there's a lot of really, really great insight, and there's just a lot of wisdom on the stage, to tell you the truth. But Greg, first of all, starts off talking about defending this idea of enemy love and nonviolence, even in the face of a situation like Germany had when Hitler rose to power, and there were many Christians who felt like the right thing to do would be to use violence to eliminate Hitler, and Greg empathized with that viewpoint, but argued that ultimately it's not what Jesus is teaching. Osheta then talked about, well, who exactly is my enemy? And this was probably, well, I'll add something else later, probably. I mean, for right now in the summary, this was my favorite part of the panel discussion. And she just talked about, you know, how she understands an enemy. And she's right. She says in the panel that she doesn't go around thinking of her arch nemesis or her lifelong enemy or anything. Like, she just doesn't think about that type of stuff. But Jesus's teaching still applies to her, because there are people for whom her empathy ends. Like, she has a hard time having empathy for them, and it's those people that Jesus' teaching on enemy love applies to. Where your empathy fails, that's where you need to apply your enemy love. And I thought that was just profound. Ted talked about restorative justice, and how restorative justice is different than retributive justice, and I thought that was really, really good. And he really kind of talked about restorative justice. The restoration there has to do with unity, and the bonds of relationship are healed, and he looks at Matthew chapter 18, where two or three are gathered, there I am also. Cedric talked about systems, and I love systems thought, and he had just a lot of wisdom to share here. But he said that one thing that he tries to remember when he thinks of an enemy is that they are part of a system, and they are a lot of times the product of a system. It's, which is not to say that they don't have any personal responsibility. It's more just that there's all sorts of unseen forces that are pulling on the puppet strings as well. I mean, we each get to pull on our own puppet strings, but there are a lot of puppet strings, and there are a lot of forces that pull on those. And he just noted that it doesn't really matter. Oh, see, I'm making a mess. Hold on a second. It doesn't really matter who you are. You can be, a white guy, you could be a black woman, you could be, a refugee. You could be at all sorts of different parts of the socioeconomic scale. Jesus's teaching is a challenge that we all have to work on. And I really appreciated that. He said that, he just noted, and I thought this was funny because it's just so true. He said that I have more compassion on myself when I do something wrong than when you do something wrong to me. and that means that that's something that he needs to work on. He needs to find that same amount of compassion for you, because, when I do something wrong, I understand this whole network, this whole web of my life story and the challenges that I've had to overcome and all of that kind of stuff. And Cedric really challenged us to remember that the person that we consider an enemy, they have all of that stuff as well. And I thought that was really great. Osheta talked about the fact that when we lay our life down for somebody else, that's not being passive. It's not that you're a doormat. It's that you're challenging one of these systems. You're challenging the system of the world. It's a very proactive sort of thing. And she also kind of looked at some of the nuances of what does it look like to hear Jesus' teaching on enemy love if you are in a marginalized circumstance, if you are part of a marginalized population. And she had a lot of really good things to say there as well. Let's see. Ted talked about 2 different types of vulnerability. That was really good. And then Osheta, Greg asked her, what are some practices that you can do to form your character so that you can be more naturally vulnerable? And so she had a lot of really good ideas. She does the Lord's Prayer every day to just remember that enemy love. And she tries to remember that people are complex, sort of echoing what Cedric had said. She also does something called a loving kindness prayer, which I don't know about that. I have to look into that one yet. But then she finished the panel discussion off with this Lectio Divina, where she read John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11. And she read it 3 times through with little tinkly music in the background. And it was... Usually, see, this is why I love having people like Osheta on staff, because I would never think of anything like this. These little activities, they just escape me. I'm not good at thinking of stuff like that, and it's the type of activity where I'm just like, okay, the Lectio Divina has started, the panel discussion is pretty much over, and which is tragic because I ended up really liking this activity. And what she did is she read through John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11. And this is the lady who was caught in the act of adultery, or as Shawna and I talked about a few weeks ago, the men who were caught with stones in their hands. And it was really fun because each time she read it through, she invited people to hear the story as if they were one of the people in the story. And each time you go through, you imagine yourself as a different person in the story. And it really brings the story to life in a way that was surprising. And so I encourage you to if you watch the MuseCast without watching the sermon, which is crazy, silly, don't do that. You should watch the sermon as well. But if you haven't watched the sermon yet, make sure you go back and listen to that, because that was pretty awesome. We do have a question now. The panel discussion kicked off with a question to Greg about Hitler, and that person, I think it's pronounced Andre, actually emailed the MuseCast a follow-up question, and very appreciative of Greg's response. And so I'm really glad that was received well by Andre. But Andre also asks this. He asks about the Romans 12 and 13 discussion that Greg had on Sunday, where Greg talks about how God uses governments to bring about justice, and that it's not our job to judge, and it's not our job to carry out anything. It's God's going to take care of all judgment. And God uses the government and the police and stuff like that in order to do that. And Andre asks, well, it just seems like you could view that in a way that it's sort of like a passive laziness where, oh, great, you're a Christian, so you're not going to do anything violent. You're not going to, uphold the law. You're not going to carry a baton and handcuffs and a gun, but somebody else is going to have to do that. And so as a Christian, you're just basically, being all protected by the police. And there's sort of this sense in which, well, isn't that special that you get to be nonviolent? But then other people, in order to maintain your opportunity to be nonviolent, other people do have to be violent. And so they have to get their hands dirty and maybe even bloody in order for you to be nonviolent. And it's a very astute sort of criticism, I think. But here's how I would counter it. And I don't know what Greg would say about this. And I think it's a really good question that maybe I'll even bring up in our Renew podcast next time I talk with Greg there. But how I would respond to it is this. If everybody followed Jesus's command to love your enemy, if everybody lived that out, we wouldn't need police. We wouldn't need a military. If everybody lived out the Sermon on the Mount, we wouldn't have this discussion. We wouldn't have to talk about other people having to bear arms, because the love that Jesus is commanding and teaching would absolutely eradicate any need for violence or any need for law enforcement or any need for military. And so that's what I'm saying, is that if the world obeyed Jesus's teaching, then this wouldn't be an issue. Now, of course, the world doesn't obey this teaching yet, but hopefully it will someday. And this is where my answer comes in. We'll never get to that point unless some people start to actually live it out now and take a stand and say, I am not going to be violent. I am going to love my enemy. I am not going to kill. I am not going to murder, maim. I'm not going to use violence. We'll never get to the point where we don't need military if we keep relying on military. Now, if somebody's a police officer, if somebody's in the military, God bless them. I don't know what to think about that. I would have a hard time as a person who's trying to live out Matthew 5 and also trying to be in the military. I don't know how that would work. But my point is that people need to, someone needs to start living it out if we're ever going to get to the point where everybody is living it out. And that means that there's going to be a time when there are some people who are trying to live nonviolently, and there are some people who are still using the military, still using the police, still relying on those things as a solution to their problems. And so that's, I think, how I would respond to that. Yes, the nonviolent community is benefiting from the presence of the military and the police. I think you could make that argument. But I think that the whole world will benefit in a much greater and more profound way by the work and the courage that's done by people who are trying to live nonviolently. Really great question. Hopefully that is something to think about for an answer. Other than that, let's see if there's anything else that I should talk about here. Who's my enemy? Yeah, I really like, there's a lot of really good things that were said here. Some of the system stuff that Cedric talked about, boy, that was really good. Just remembering that the person who is my enemy is part of the system. And a lot of times I'm part of the same system. Whenever I do work in psychology, there's so many systems in psychology. And, for instance, in Confident Humility, I talk a lot about shame and pride, and how a lot of times people will get hurt by shame dysfunction. And a lot of times their therapeutic journey, they want to go as far away from shame as possible, and they end up with like arrogance dysfunctions. and you'll see this in society, where societies will swing between kind of a shame-oriented society and then to an arrogance-oriented society. And I think right now our society is shifting toward an arrogance-oriented society. Surround yourself with like-minded people, cancel culture, all of that type of stuff. And so we see all of those systems, and Cedric's insight to just remember that everybody's part of a system and that you're part of the same system. That means that even if you are the oppressed and they are the oppressor and they have all the power, you still have work to do no matter which part of that you're in. Now, the oppressor has more work to do, of course, but everybody in a system has work to do if the system is going to get overthrown. And I thought that was really amazing. This weekend, I think we're going to finish off this section. We're going to finish chapter 5 of the Sermon on the Mount, and because the MuseCast audience is so loyal, and we care so much about the MuseCast audience, I have this inside information for you. I get to do the last sermon in the chapter, and I'm super excited about it. And the last verse is Matthew 5:48. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. And so I want to look at what does Jesus mean there by perfect, and how does that relate to everything that has come before in chapter 5? And I think it's going to be a fun discussion. So I hope to see you there. And next week we'll have Shawna back and myself and maybe a guest. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. So I hope you guys enjoy the panel discussion. Please watch it. And we will see you next week. I hope you get to watch my sermon this weekend as well. And I hope I don't blow it. So see you guys.